Hello, and welcome to the BOFIN Buzz, the podcast for anyone fascinated by farming's future. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the BOFIN Buzz. And it's just been International Women's Day, and I am delighted that we are joined today by Hannah Darby, who farms in Cambridgeshire. So, hello, Hannah. How are you?
Hi, Tom. Yeah, I'm good. The sun is sort of shining, so I'm happy.
Which is a very rare event this year. I have to say, we have had more than enough of our fair share of rain here in Oxfordshire, and I'm sure it's
Yeah.
been the same for you, Hannah, this year, hasn't it?
Yes, absolutely. It hasn't seemed to stop since October, so let's hope that we're getting to the end of it now.
Well, yes, let's hope indeed. So the sun is shining, and I'm delighted that you've joined us today, Hannah. But first of all, before we get started, I'm really keen to know if there were three key things that you want to change about your farming system, what would they be?
So the first thing I think would be to try and get more consistent establishment of our crops. So both our cash crops and our cover and companion crops. That I think is a real key for us. The other two things are trying to learn how to utilise our companion crops better and work out what grows well with what. And then the last one is learning what inputs that we can reduce. And we've been doing some trials on those kind of things over the last few years. So it's just kind of working on those and seeing what we can take forward.
Yeah, well, I have to say, three really worthy areas there. And actually, they tie in quite nicely with a lot of the projects that we're doing, as I think you're aware. And we'll touch on one of those in a bit. But first of all, I'd like to understand, let's hear a little bit more about your farm at home. I've been to visit it. I'm very lucky. It's a beautiful area of the country. But tell me about it. Tell me about the farm.
Well, so I farm with my Uncle Tony and my mum and Sam and Harry. So there's quite a few of us on the farm. We farm between Peterborough and Huntingdon in Cambridgeshire, and we have some very interesting soil types. So half the farm is organic peat and the other half is quite heavy clay. And that's all within 5 miles of each other. I used to be a physiotherapist, and I decided to come back to the farm 10 years ago, being the fourth generation of this family to farm. I feel that being a physio was useful because it's made me be quite analytical about what we do on the farm and take a real kind of problem solving approach to what we do. And that's why I like trials so much, as you know.
Yeah, but I mean that's I have to say, being a physiotherapist, that's not many people's route into agriculture, Hannah. I mean, what
No.
led you to move from physiotherapy into farming?
Well, it was always what I did when in the summers as I grew up, I would always help at harvest, but I just didn't think it was something that I really wanted to get involved in and wanted to do something for myself. But harvest time, when I was working as a physiotherapist on the hot wards of Colchester Hospital, I just felt like I was kind of in the wrong place. And it was a heart decision rather than a head decision. I don't think any of us feel that by becoming farmers, we're going to become multimillionaires overnight. But it just felt like something that was going to make me happier in the long run.
I see. And of course, as we've already talked about, I mean, farming has got its challenges, and I'm sure you've come across a fair few of those yourself. I mean, have there been any sort of particular moments where you thought, "Oh my God, what am I doing in this job?" Or alternatively, have there been moments where you thought, "That's it, I've cracked it. This is the thing." So, I mean, any sort of particular moments that appear to you?
I don't think that I'd ever say that we think we've cracked it at all.
Always learning.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for us, there's been quite a few significant changes in the farming structure since I came back to the farm. We've done quite a lot in the last probably 5-6 years. We've given up a tenancy that we had in the family for 60 years, and we've bought a smaller farm nearby, which means that we're not travelling 20 miles to the other side of Peterborough. And that was there was lots of reasons why, but in COVID, when I was driving a tractor over to that farm and there wasn't any cars and suddenly there were cars, I thought, what on earth are we doing driving all this heavy machinery around Peterborough? So that was a huge decision, and it's taken me about 2 years to kind of get over the move, so to speak. I do think one of the things I think is very positive is, since we have been on the path of no cultivations or very minimal cultivations, seeing the change in the soil and the resilience of the land. And I think, was it 22 that was such a horrifically hot harvest, and incredibly early, but just seeing that actually in the past, in those kind of fields, we would have had a much reduced yield, but actually the set of circumstances, and I think what we're doing, meant that it was a really good yield and a really good crop for us. So seeing some of the wins at the end of the season after a difficult season, which all of them now, as we both know, seem to be.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, one area where we share an interest, you could say, is in slugs, which sounds a bit strange, but you have been involved in a project that we have had underway at BOFIN. So this is Slimers, Strategies Leading to Improved Management and Enhanced Resilience Against Slugs. It's a 3-year project, and we are looking at ways of moving away from slug pellets, reducing our dependence on them. I mean, it is, slugs cost the industry £43 million a year, and slug pellets are the only way that we can currently control these nasty, slimy pests. And I know that you struggled with them, Hannah, as well. And so you've been helping us. You're one of our 27 slug sleuths. So you've been helping us tackle them. So could you just describe for me, describe the trial that we established in one of your fields?
Yeah. So I have one particularly horrible field. It is obviously the field that faces the road that everyone can see. And after, with your help, the EC scanning of the field, we realised that it's probably in parts one of the heaviest clays that you could possibly have. And these areas of the field always suffer with their establishment and the amount of slugs that we get. So before we drilled, a 1 hectare square was set up in the field. And you'll have to remind me, Tom, exactly how many slug traps we had in that 1 hectare. But there was a lot.
100.
I thought it was 100.
Yeah.
So there was 100 slug traps to be recorded weekly, how many slugs we had under each of them. And also how many beneficial beetles we had, which was really interesting.
Yeah, so you were also you also took part in our beetle trial as well. So I mean, this is just to give everyone a little bit of history here. So this is actually the second year of slug work that we've been doing at BOFIN. We did a trial last year looking at slug-resistant wheat, and many people who listen to this will have heard about our slug-resistant wheat trial. If you go to bofin.org.uk, you can get to understand more about it. But as I say, we started the trial last year, very, very hot summer, followed by a dry autumn, as you say, Hannah, and there were no slugs. But one thing that we did notice was lots and lots of beetles, and that piqued our interest. We thought, well, just what influence are the beetles having on the slug population? So we got in touch with Kelly Jowett at Rothamsted University, who's one of the country's leading experts on this, and lo and behold, she has a trap that you can use to monitor beetles. And she came up with a protocol for us to monitor the beetles across some of our trials, and you very kindly stepped up to the mark, Hannah, and took part. So I think it was 20 beetle traps that you had within your field. Just describe for us what these traps were.
So unfortunately, beetles were harmed in the trial. You can't really get away from that fact, can you, Tom?
No.
Basically, it was a plastic cup that was sunk into the ground at the same level as the soil, and it was filled with water and a little bit of washing up liquid, and the beetles walked into the trap. And then at the same time as we did the slug counts, we also counted the amount of beetles there were in the 20 beetle traps. And with Kelly's wonderful book, we tried to ID the beetles that we had in the traps, which was really interesting as well, to see if they were the ones that were going to hopefully help us to eat and destroy some of our slug population. So it was really interesting to see that actually I thought, and I mean, this is just my subjective opinion, that as time went on, we seemed to be trapping more beetles. But unfortunately, as we both know, the trial wasn't so successful this year.
No, that's right. Yes. So unfortunately, the crop just didn't emerge. I seem to remember.
No, so it was planted, and the day after it was planted, it rained, and then it rained, and then it didn't rain, and it rained so much that the fields that the water comes off our fields and our neighbours' fields, and it actually flooded the village that we're in. So it kind of gives an idea of the amount of water that we had in those few days. And I joked that all of our wheat ended up in the village. It wasn't so bad. I think about half of that farm has to be re-drilled. So I actually thought at one point it was going to be the whole farm, but it was those particularly heavy clay bits of the field that really suffered the most. So it was a combination of the heavy clay and potentially the slug population, because what we were catching when the first few weeks, I thought was a scary amount of slugs. I didn't think it would be anywhere near the amount that we were actually seeing in those traps, which scared me a lot.
Yeah, I think you did about 3 visits to the traps before we had to. We took the decision to pull the plug and take up the trial, I believe. Is that right?
Yes, I think 3. We did. Yes, definitely. It was just as you were seeing kind of rows appearing on the kind of bits of soil in the field that you realise that these bits were probably just never going to establish. And they didn't. And those bits are still waterlogged now. So.
Oh, good grief. So you still haven't managed to establish them because you were planning to put in a spring crop, I think.
Yes. Hopefully by the time this airs, the weather might be kinder and we might have actually got somewhere. I'm confident, Tom. I've got the seed dressed. So maybe I'm a fool, but hopefully we'll get some spring wheat into those patches of those fields.
Oh, that would be brilliant because I tell you what, so I have also established a plot, the same sort of hectare thing. So we did the same thing. We had it EC mapped by Clive Blacker of Aggravation, and chose an area within the field, and exactly the same thing happened. We didn't even manage to get our wheat in before it rained. It just rained and rained and rained. Just about 3 weeks ago, we finally managed to get it drilled. We haven't laid down the traps yet. We were waiting to put on the pre-em herbicide, and we still haven't put the pre-em herbicide down. I'm not entirely sure whether we ever will, I'm afraid. But we're just about to put the traps down and get going now. Here we are almost in March. And whereas most of the other sleuths have already finished, they've already submitted their data. It's been analysed, and it is going to be I think so this is being recorded just before the Farm Carbon event on the 6th of March, which is where the results will be revealed. So look out for videos and coverage of the event and of the results from that. I don't even know myself, Hannah, what the results are.
I'm looking forward to hearing. I'm just sorry that my data hasn't really contributed to that part yet.
Well, I'm hoping, Hannah, that if you do manage to get a field drilled in spring wheat, that even though it's going to be late and so on, it will be quite interesting because there'll be your data set and there'll be my data set, both from spring drilled crops, which might show an interesting aspect on this trial. So if you're up for it, it'd be great if we could re-establish your trial. Will that be all right?
Absolutely, yeah. No, I'm keen because slugs are still a problem for us in spring drilling not as much as they are, but as they are in winter drilling.
Anyway, as I say, it's worth looking out for those results. As I said, that'll be coming out. The initial results coming out shortly, but there will be a more detailed report coming out through the season as well. So keep your eyes peeled. And also, we follow the trials and tribulations of this trial on our farming forum, which is the Slug Circle, a part of the farming forum in the Knowledge in Farming area. So do look out for the discussions that are going on in there. Plenty of really good information coming through in that, with especially with Keith Walters, who's our scientist from Harper Adams University, helping us with the science. Now let's go on to the first element, because actually, I mean, this really, this element of improving establishment, as you say, which is one area that you're keen to look into. I mean, that does. If there's ever been a year where it's been more challenging, it has to be this one, I guess, doesn't it, Hannah?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that hit the nail on the head, and everything that we're doing with the Slimers trial, I'm keen to understand how much of the difficulties we are having are slugs and how much is weather, and how much is, I'm quite confident in our drill and our technique with drilling and our seed rates and that kind of thing. But sometimes things are just really patchy. So it may well be that the soil structure isn't great. Yeah, there's lots of different components to that. And as we all know, if you don't get the crop established well, then you've got nothing to harvest. So that's why that's probably, it's a massive topic, but it's really important. And I think everything else that we're trying to look at on the farm kind of feeds into it as well.
Yeah. Now, one thing that you mentioned was that did you say that you're going down the direct drilling route?
Yeah. So we haven't really done any significant cultivations in the last 6 years. So
Right.
there are certain fields that we know that will need a bit of a subsoil. And we have
Yeah.
done some, especially the farm that we don't know so well, that we've only had for 2 years, that has needed more subsoiling, just because we're kind of learning where the patches are that don't suit direct drilling just yet. But especially
So
on our fen soil, we are doing a
yeah,
lot
I was
more
going
direct
to ask,
drilling.
farming on fen soil and then heavy clay soil. I mean, gosh, that must be two of the most challenging soil types there are, really, for an arable farmer. I mean, tell me about what are the sort of main differences between the two when it comes to establishment?
I laugh because they are like chalk and cheese. So the fen soil, if you over cultivate it, it becomes very light and fluffy and easily blows away. And whereas the heavy clay soils, well, they're just that. They're heavy. They run together. The water doesn't necessarily go through them, and they really need living roots in them most of the time to enable you to establish a good crop, and that's the key. But I say they're chalk and cheese. I'd say that both benefit from the same things. So living roots, cover crops, companion crops, cash crops, and direct drilling actually has been really beneficial to both of those soil types.
Well,
Maybe slightly more challenging on the heavy clay soils than I would say
yeah.
on the fen soils.
Well, that leads us very neatly into your second key area, which was companion cropping.
Yes.
And you did mention just now the importance of roots in the soil. So is that something that you're keen to look at in more detail?
Yes. So the motivation for growing two things together as cash crops came from when we were growing peas. I still am growing peas, but just not for the last few years because it's not the right time in the rotation. But they always went flat, especially on our really fertile fen soils. So I just thought, well, what would happen if we put oats with them? Something to provide scaffolding for them to hold them up. And it worked really well. So initially, oh gosh, the first year we did 2 tram lines, and the tram lines yielded like 6 tons a hectare of both, whereas the field did about 3 tons of peas. So I was like, oh, this is really interesting. I've not put many oats on, and I've kind of doubled the output. So then we did a field, and then the last time we did all the fields. And there was kind of 2 main benefits from it. You got the oats as well, which, okay, you've got to work out how to separate out of the peas. But also from a weed control point of view, which I hadn't really thought about, the oats did something to suppress the weeds. And so we weren't spending a lot of money on post-emergence herbicides that on our fen soil don't last very long. If you got kind of 4 to 6 weeks control, you'd done well. So the end of the season, your peas always were full of weeds anyway. So it was really positive. So the next stage really is working out what will grow with what, and how are they things that we're going to take all the way through to harvest, or are they things that we're going to be quite happy if the frost kills off one component in the winter, if it was, say, spring beans in winter wheat or something. So we're just
Well, I have to say, Hannah, you may be interested in a project that we are currently doing at the moment in BOFIN, and we are on the lookout for pulse pioneers to help with this project. So it is a project looking at pulses, looking at growing pulses better, and it's a very ambitious project. This one, it's called NCS, which stands for nitrate smart. I'm afraid I haven't got it in front of me, and it's a really stupid title, actually, but we call it the NCS project for short. And in fact, if you go to ncsproject.co.uk, then there's more information about it there. But let me tell you about this project. It's a £5.9 million DEFRA funded project. It's going on for 4 years, led by the PGRO. We've got about 17 industry partners, partners who have got really interesting elements, be they scientists or involved in agronomy or whatever, across the range of pulses. And it's those elements that we're looking to bring into this project. And then at the center of it is up to 40 pulse pioneers that we're going to be recruiting to do on-farm trials. We paid to do these trials, and it's looking at trying to grow pulses better. And this sort of thing, companion cropping, is exactly what we want to have a look at. So I think the window of joining our Pulse Pioneers for this season might be just about over, Hannah, but certainly for next year, perhaps, hopefully you'll consider coming in. But it's exactly these sorts of things that we want to look at, growing peas with oats. And I believe that PGRO have actually been doing some research into this very topic. And there is, so this allelopathy, I think it is, isn't it?
Yes,
this
it
effect,
is.
that oats have with peas. So that's something that you've actually seen in your fields, you reckon?
Oh, definitely, definitely. I mean, I too have been in touch with PGRO about it in the past. Not recently, because it's been 2 years since we grew peas and oats together. Last year we grew all of our beans with oats. We did some seed rate trials with that
Right.
as well. But I did get a
you
bit
see the same? Sorry, Hannah. Did you see the same effect with your beans then?
different soil type, so it's slightly different.
Right.
It's slightly more difficult to say because it was growing on. We've got some fields that are what I would call skirt fen, so a lot less organic matter. They just would have been naturally the edge of the fen, rather
Right.
than and probably through cultivation slightly more wasted over time. But we didn't put any herbicides on those beans at all, and we didn't really have any problems. Whereas in the past, we
Brilliant.
probably would have put a pre-emergence herbicide just as a matter of course. I have to say that the beans were drilled in the end of April, which is obviously not been drilling weather, but we all know that last spring was also quite challenging for establishing spring crops. And so that was when we got them in. But I was really pleased that we were still able to achieve maybe 3.5 tons of oats and beans, because I definitely wouldn't imagine getting that from a bean crop on its own at that time of year.
Yeah. So wait a minute. So you got 3.5 tons of beans, and
No,
you
no.
also
Well,
got.
no. The
Sorry.
combination was 3.5 tons.
Right.
One day, Tom, I'll tell you, but they're still combined as a mixture in the shed. Hopefully soon not to be. But I know that if we'd grown beans on their own at that time on those fields, we'd probably only get a ton or a ton and a half of beans because it was so late. So we did
Right.
get, there was an uplift, I imagine, compared to what would be normal on those fields. Most years, if we got 3.5 tons of beans from being drilled in February, we would be quite happy. So they're not
Right.
very productive fields.
And this was drilled in April.
Right
So
at the end of April, it was nearly May.
yeah, and there was no herbicide as well. So I think it was a pretty low cost
Yep.
crop as well.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. There
I mean, that looks
wasn't
like
any inputs
oh,
apart from I think one fungicide. That was it.
yeah. By the way, I was talking to someone the other day who makes animal feed. He has a mobile unit, I think, that he sends around farms where they mill animal feed, and he said that beans with oats is something that you can mill them together and run them together. I mean, I didn't talk to him for very long about it, but perhaps that's something we can bring onto the BOFIN Buzz in a future episode. So watch
Absolutely.
the space for more, I guess, would be the idea there. But let's move to your the last one that you mentioned, which was, I mean, we've been talking about it all the way through this podcast, Hannah, reducing inputs. So tell me a bit more about that then.
Yes, well, I suppose my drive for the companion cropping is also kind of driving this too. But on our organic fen soil, we don't really need nitrogen. In fact, last year, I've done 3 years of nitrogen trials now, and last year we actually saw a negative effect of bagged nitrogen. So
Right.
we have a huge amount of residual soil nitrogen when we measure it in January and February. This year, less than last year for quite obvious reasons. But still, we're probably at the point now where we can confidently say that actually we're not really getting much of a yield effect from bagged nitrogen. Foliar nitrogen is a different matter. So it's just kind of moving that timing and increasing the efficiency. And now this year, we'll probably on our other soil, although, as you know, we probably haven't got as much winter wheat on that soil as I would have hoped for. So for other obvious reasons, we probably won't be putting on the level of nitrogen that we might have done. But we certainly will be doing some trials on there to see what is the best rate on those kind of soil types.
Oh, that sounds fascinating, Hannah. And you might be interested in another project that we've got. So, sorry, it probably sounds terrible. Like I'm pushing all of these projects onto you. So this is Truth. So thriving roots underpinning total soil health, where what we're looking at is the interaction between wheat roots and the soil around it. So this is it's a 3-year project that we just started in January. We are looking for root rangers here to be involved in this trial and to do trials this time looking at the actual roots. So we know so much that's going on above the ground. It's below the ground where we really don't know. We haven't got the tools to measure it. That's the thing. So what we're trying to do is look at what tools we can bring in that will help us measure what's going on in the soil microbiome and the roots as well. So we're working with the University of Nottingham, who have got these fantastic they do this soil coring. You take a soil core, which keeps your roots intact, and then they put it into this special CT scanner, and it gives you a 3D image of what your roots look like. So fascinating for root architecture. We're also working with John Innes Centre, looking at microbial analysis of the soil, and specifically around the soil rhizosphere right next door to the roots. And we're also working with the Crop Science Centre, looking at mycorrhizal fungi and the element of how much mycorrhizal fungi wheat roots have, and the relationship between the mycorrhizal fungi and the plant. So those are the aspects that we're measuring through this platform that we're setting up. But one of the really interesting things that I think you'll be interested in, Hannah, is that as part of this, we've identified some wheats. So this is the Wish Roots project that John Innes Centre has been involved with. I think it's an international collaboration, Wish Roots, and they have found some interesting wheats. So they've been looking through wheats that have interesting abilities. Some of the wheats that we don't grow anymore, known as the Watkins lines, they're landrace varieties, and they've found 2 that apparently have this ability to inhibit nitrogen in the soil. You can put products on now that inhibits nitrifying bacteria, so it sort of slows down the rate at which nitrogen breaks down in the soil, so you don't lose as much. Anyway, it turns out that wheat has that ability, or just certain varieties. None of the varieties that we use at the moment, but these old land races, they've established that, and they've done some quite interesting trials to show that it does have quite a nitrifying effect. So the exciting thing is that we're multiplying up some of these varieties, and in the 3rd year of the trial, we're going to have them available to our root rangers to look at and use these new tools to measure exactly what's going on in the soil. So I hope you'll be involved in that, will you?
That sounds really interesting, and it's always been a bit of a bugbear of mine that we don't really understand what's going on under the soil. So we know the science of what we hope is happening, but we don't really know if what we're doing is actually helping or hindering until maybe you come to harvest and you go, oh, well, that patch wasn't very good. What happened there? So no, that's all sounds really, really exciting. And
Well,
unfortunately, unfortunately, I was just going to say, I think in the last, few years, obviously, we've been breeding crops for quantity and for yield, but we haven't really been thinking about rooting and the potential of rooting to help our crops be more resilient, especially when we do hit all these droughts that inevitably happen at the end of the season. So that's really exciting stuff.
Well, no, that's exactly what we're looking to provide. And one of the aspects of this project is we're working with PES Technologies. They've developed this new sensor that you just take a bit of the soil and you pop it in, and it acts like a soil nose, so it can sense the volatiles that come off the soil, and from the volatiles, everything has a sort of a signature that it can detect, and it can tell you an awful lot about the microbes that are in the soil. So they know that it can actually detect these different microbes. What we're going to be doing through the project is gathering loads and loads of soil samples, going out with the tester, testing on people's farms, and just ground truthing it, ground truthing the sensor as part of the project, which is currently a prototype. So really exciting. And now I think you now, as I say, this is being recorded just before the Soil Carbon event, and so on the 6th of March, you would have been along to our event, and you would have seen the sensor. So by the time this goes
cool.
out, you will have hopefully have seen it. But again, as I
and
say,
I'm sure I will be very impressed.
Yes,
I am now very impressed.
So, but do look out for the videos on that and the coverage as well. But before we go, one of the things that you were talking about was where we're going with our crop breeding. You mentioned just a minute ago, and again, I'm very excited. By the way, Hannah, that we have. We're just about to start another project. We're going to start a new platform called Probity. This is a platform to rate organisms bred for improved traits and yield. And this is something that we've been working on at BOFIN with a number of industry partners to bring the first new gene-edited crops into the UK. And we've got 3 of them that we're going to be introducing. Now, it's going to take a while to multiply them up. We don't think we're actually going to have them in the ground on commercial farms until 2025 at the earliest, autumn 2025 for 2026 harvest. It's going to take that long to multiply them up. But in the meantime, we are going to be looking at the regulation behind it, looking at people's attitudes to growing gene-edited crops as well. So I'm interested to know, Hannah. I mean, is this a project that you think might interest you? There's this whole area of gene-edited crops. What are your thoughts in terms of being a farmer who might one day be growing these crops?
I think anything that can improve the resilience of what we're growing has to be positive. So whether, as you've mentioned before, looking back at historical varieties that we've discarded because maybe they weren't as at that point as useful as we now know that they might be, or new breeding techniques that might get those traits in to crops to improve the resilience and maybe the nutrient density of food is really important. And if that in then turn means that we don't need to use as much fertilizer or inputs, then that is a game changer, absolutely. I'm always interested in this kind of space, maybe because of genetic modification and that kind of thing. If farmers would still be able to home save their own seed, if it's going to, because I'm not 100% sure exactly how it works with gene editing and that kind of side of things, because I've found in the last few years by home saving our seed that we've got a lot better establishment of what we're growing by growing on crops that have already been grown in our soil, which I think is quite an interesting concept. So that's my only slight reservation. But otherwise, I think, really positive.
No, that's a really interesting point you raised there, and I have to say, I think, the technologies we're talking about here, well, potentially they can be quite expensive, but potentially they can be quite liberating as well in terms of an awful lot. It's not as expensive as genetic modification, and there are many more people doing it. The opportunities to do it are much greater and wider than perhaps previous technologies. The difficulty, which is one of the aspects that we're looking to address with this, is where does the IP lie? Where does the IP of the technology lie, and who's going to be charging whom what? At the same time, we do have, so hybrid wheats are just coming in. Hybrid wheats exist, but the way they're grown at the moment currently makes them a little bit, sort of left to feel. It's not something that many farmers can afford to grow. The
Yeah.
seed is basically too expensive, and there are new technologies coming in with hybrid wheat, and you do wonder just whether that's going to lock up the technology. But at the same
Mm.
time, I think we've seen with hybrid crops in other crops that it's down to the how the variety performs actually, and it's not necessarily whether it's a hybrid or whether it's a non-hybrid. And so and at the end of the day, it'll be us farmers who decide how it's done.
Yeah.
So
What suits our farms and our farming system? Absolutely.
yeah, and that's very much the idea of this platform, that it's a farmer-led platform. We are going to be, again, paying farmers to do on-farm trials with these crops. We have to in England, so sorry to everyone in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. I'm afraid you can't take part because currently your governments don't allow you to grow gene-edited crops. It's the Genetic Technologies Precision Breeding Bill that was enacted last year that allows farmers in England to do this. But those farmers who do, we're looking for 25 PBO pioneers, we're calling them. Precision bred organism is what PBO stands for. Anyway, when that project comes forward, then we'll be telling everyone more about it. And these are exactly the sorts of aspects that we want to explore, how we can free up this technology and make it more widely available for farmers. So look, this has been a really great conversation, Hannah. It's always a
Absolutely.
pleasure to talk to you. And it's and as I say, I've been to your farm. It is one of the most loveliest places in England. But before we go, I just want to ask. I mean, when you think about your farm, when you think about farming in general, where are we going with this? What's your sort of what's your wish for the future, if you like?
Well, in general, I feel really optimistic, Tom. I have to say, about a week ago, not so much, when I sold some wheat at £20 a tonne less than I did a month ago, that
Agreed.
was a bit sad, and I felt a bit sad about the future of our industry. But actually, taking a step back, and I can only speak of my hopes for arable farming in the east of England, because I know that things look incredibly different UK wide. But I think we're probably going to focus more on the quality of what we produce, maybe more than the quantity that we have in the past, and reducing the waste and maybe the inputs that we're putting in, but also kind of creating a more joined up food system is what I hope for. And as we both know, I think innovation, on-farm trials, farmer-led ideas from the bottom up is really where I see the exciting progress of our industry. Everything that you've taught today that BOFIN is doing and everything that we're trying to do on the farm, it's just amazing how you can see that some of these things really do make a difference. And some of the things you've been doing for years, you leave out and go, oh gosh, that actually wasn't that good. So yeah, no, I'm optimistic.
No, that's great. I mean, I couldn't agree more with all of that, as you could probably imagine, and especially the elements of farmer-led innovation. I always say that knowledge has value, and us as farmers, we undervalue the knowledge that we do have, but it's absolutely valueless unless you share it. And I mean, that's one aspect that we are trying to encourage. I think you've done one or two contributions on the Slug Circle, haven't you? Have you?
Yeah, I'm not so good at putting my head up there and saying this is what I've done and this is what's gone well and what's not gone well. I
Oh,
have to be
rubbish.
encouraged, Tom, by you. So I will try and be better, I promise.
No,
But
but
I think
well,
especially with the Slimers project this year, I was a bit like, oh gosh, why is it not stopped raining? But I am confident that we will hopefully get something established at some point this spring and have some trial, to look at hopefully by harvest time.
well, I think you're being needlessly bashful there, Hannah, because every time I talk with you, I learn something new. I think what you're doing on your farm is fascinating. Looking forward to hearing more. But look, it's been such a pleasure. It really has, and thank you all very much for joining us on this episode of the BOFIN Buzz. So it just leaves me to say thank you very much to Hannah Darby.
Thank you very much, Tom, for having me.
and we'll see you again on the BOFIN Buzz. Thank you very much, and goodbye.